Probably going to live less materially and experientially. Hi Ryan, I want to talk about something that's simultaneously making a lot of us young parents uncomfortable while also talking about truths about the world that we live in. We know from scientific data that the climate is changing, and a big part of that is how we're living our lives today. We also know that our children are going to have to live with a future that we leave them based on the lifestyles that we live today. What I think most young parents haven't embraced yet is just how materially and experientially different our children's lives are going to be because of it. It's a big point of conversation right now to talk about the fact that the generations coming up are not going to be better off than we were. And I think we think about that primarily in terms of economic advantages, things like their income and how expensive housing and food and other necessities are going to be. And all of those things make sense. Those are needs, not want. When we talk about our kids being better off than us, I have to ask the question, what else do we want for them? Multiple vacations a year, international travel. I think most Americans right now are doing better than our global counterparts, and we have to really look internally and ask ourselves, what are we asking for our kids to be better off then? There may be rising inequality in the United States, but I think when we look globally, there's an even bigger concern that we're not even thinking about other people's children around the world. And a lot of Americans will probably get pretty pissed off at me right now and talk about how we need to take care of ourselves first. I think primarily my concern is less, is it the United States versus other people, as it is, what is the next generation's life going to look like? Because for us, we've had the opportunity to travel internationally and do a lot of really cool and amazing things, but I don't know how much of that opportunity is going to be afforded to our grandkids and kids after that. I think we have to embrace the idea that our grandkids may not be better off than us, and that might not be such a bad thing. So in order to think about why it's so important for us to actually care about this, I think we have to think about how bad things have gotten. The last 5 years have been the hottest on record, and the top 10 warmest years have been in the last 15 years. Add into that the fact that winter and tropical storms are increasing, and there are countries that may not partially exist anymore in the next couple generations, and islands that are sinking into the water, and the world is not in great shape. And every year that problem continues to grow, both because of greed and because of a lack of willingness to do anything about the problem, and also a lack of willingness to look internally and reflect on the fact that we can do better too. And while all this is happening, our two small children are growing up in a world where their values are being formed and shaped, and we're teaching them what's an acceptable way to live. Is it going to be lots of international travel? Is it going to be a lot of vacations? We may be able to afford those things, but should we? Should we really be spending our time and money and energy on those things, or what kind of example should we be setting for them? I think it's important to think about this because our collective lifestyles are what's going to shape the opportunities that our kids have and their ability to live an even modest lifestyle in the future. It's really hard to think that our kids are going to have less options and less opportunity than we will. But I think it's even harder for us to give up on this idea of the American dream that we've been fed our whole lives. But I have to ask, why? I think a big part of this comes down to the fact that we were raised by our parents and our grandparents to have certain beliefs and ideas about the world that we live in. Ideas about how to gain influence and wealth and how to succeed and what success even means. And up to a point, that's not a bad thing. It's not bad to want to have security for your family. It's not bad to want to have stable housing and good food and a place for your kids to call home and experiences that make their lives richer. All of those things are good things. And stability is really important when it comes to raising kids. Just changing houses when they're young can create a lot of insecurity for small children. And I don't think it's greedy to want to create a stable life for your family. I think that's caring for your family. That's not what we're talking about. But the mindset itself is the problem. The idea that you always have to have more than the generation before you is just an extrapolation of capitalism itself. This idea that we have to have constant growth all the time and that it has to be unabated and continuous. But you only need so many cars, so many houses, so much stuff. Houses have gotten so much bigger than they used to be, which is almost double for the same size family. And I swear to God, when you have your first child, they bring a literal truck up to your front door and just dump a bunch of crap on your front step, half of it which you're never going to use anyway. Now I think there's a big asterisk/pause that people want to put in and say, wait just a second, you're talking so much about middle and upper middle class Americans and how we're going too far. What about the rich? There's so many greedier people that consume so many more resources and take up so much more than middle class Americans do. And I get it, that's a valid question to ask. Why should we be talking about middle and upper class Americans when there are people out there who are consuming an insane amount of stuff? And to me, it comes back to the idea that this lifestyle isn't sustainable no matter what social class you're in if it's not one that can be lived by everybody. What we call a middle-class lifestyle here is really an upper middle-class lifestyle to almost a rich person's lifestyle globally, because in America, you only have to make $40,000 per year to be in the global top 1%. It's insane how much wealth we have in this country compared to our global peers. And yes, it's distributed incredibly unequally, but even a middle-class lifestyle in America is incredibly affluent compared to our global peers. I think we can do both things at once. I think we can critique inequality in the way the rich live while also talking about how do we as individuals live a more sustainable and equitable lifestyle. But I'm not talking about destitution. This idea comes out a lot, that when you start to talk about equality and wanting to make things fair globally, you're asking everybody to live a very poor lifestyle, and I don't think that's the case. I think you can still take a vacation every once in a while. I think you can still eat out. I just think that there are some things that we really need to take a hard look at and ask ourselves, how much is enough? Do we all really need giant houses and multiple cars and all of these other things? Do we all really need to travel internationally constantly? I don't think the answer is yes to that. And the last thing I'll say about this is, like, I get that we're not really in a place to judge anyone. I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm just asking this hard question of us because I think it's something that we've started to slip into that gray zone. I don't know if I'm comfortable anymore with how many vacations we're taking and whether or not we're living a lifestyle that's truly sustainable. And I think it's important to continue to ask that question and figure out if you've crossed the line, because that's how you keep yourself from becoming a greedy asshole rich person. And while some of the answers might be straightforward, like, well, duh, just take less vacations and buy less shit, like, that stuff's all easy. It's the harder questions of where is that line? It's not an easy line to figure out. So one of the harder questions, I think, is how do we define what's enough? Enough is a tricky word because enough is going to be different for everybody. Equity doesn't mean that we're all going to get the same thing or deserve the same thing or need all the same things, just that we figure out what we actually need and do that and not exceed that. And personally, I think one of the things that's always been inspirational to me is in the FIRE movement. I think one of the things that was always inspirational for me was not the fact that, oh, you can retire early and you don't have to work. You can live a less consumption-driven lifestyle and still have a very rich life. And I think that was one of the things that I thought was always worth pursuing. But one of the biggest obstacles to this is actually that the United States itself is structured in such a way that everything is driven around consumption. Houses have gotten dramatically bigger and increased in size. It's almost impossible to live a car-free lifestyle at this point. And our stores are created in such a way that they intentionally try to push us to buy as much as humanly possible. And working in e-commerce, I can honestly say that it's no better online. And I get it, our economy is driven by growth, but at the same time, it comes back to that initial question of how much growth is sustainable? How much is enough? And how much of our children's future are we willing to sacrifice for that growth? As a final caveat, I know that it can be really hard for someone who might be going through a really hard time to hear something like this and not take it as a huge smack in the face that we're talking about curbing our lifestyle. And this is not a video intended for someone like that. This video is squarely intended only for people who find themselves in a position like we do, where we've been incredibly blessed. We're not independently wealthy. We couldn't quit our jobs and we'd be just fine and everything we paid for ourselves. We're not trust fund babies. We live in an 1,100 square foot house and we have modest jobs. And this is really meant to be a matter of self-examination and asking ourselves, when is enough enough? And to challenge other people to try and consider that for themselves. This is not meant to shame anyone into thinking that just getting by means that you're being excessive. This is very purposefully intended to talk about what happens when we've exceeded that and what do we do to try and help curb our worst impulses for this continuous idea of the American dream where our children have to do better than us. I think it's time to give up on that dream and actually consider the fact that at some point our children don't need to be better off than us. They just need to be more conscientious about what's happening than us. I want them to think that there's a better way to live than how we were raised, not because our parents did anything wrong intentionally or maliciously, but because we've learned so much. And we should take that knowledge and we should use it to the benefit of the world. Love always, Amanda. I'm messaging you right now telling you how to record your video while trying to record my video. That's not emotional labor. I don't know what is. What I think most of us haven't embraced yet is just how much that means for us in terms of how we live our lives. And uh-oh.